The Chicago mob boss installed cameras for his disabled daughter. Then, just after midnight, he saw the new maid doing something no doctor had dared to try. But what if the person you fear losing most is also the person your fear is slowly imprisoning rain-carved silver lines down Vincent Mercer's office windows as a security alert flashed across his screen? Miles away inside his guarded lakeside mansion, 3-year-old Nora stood without her brace, one trembling hand gripping a chair. Grace Bennett knelt several feet away with her arms open while the most dangerous man in Chicago watched from behind a screen, completely helpless. This is not only a story about a child learning to walk, it is about grief, control, trust, and a love powerful enough to transform an empire. Stay until the final step. Like the video and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The image of Nora standing alone in the midnight sunroom did not begin with the camera. It began 3 weeks earlier, before Vincent Mercer knew the sound of Grace Bennett's voice, before his daughter dared to loosen her grip on the metal frame that followed her from room to room, and before the Mercer estate remembered how to feel like a home. The mansion stood on the northern edge of Lake Forest, hidden beyond black iron gates and bare maple trees. Lake Michigan stretched behind it like dark steel. Men in black coats guarded the limestone entrance, and cameras watched every road leading toward the property. Inside the house was unnaturally still. Fresh flowers disappeared before a petal could fall. Marble floors shone without footprints. Madeline Mercer's piano remained covered, and her perfume bottles still stood in a bedroom Vincent no longer entered. The house had not moved forward after her death. It had only learned how to remain perfect without her. Vincent crossed the breakfast room just after 6:01 gray Monday morning, already dressed in a charcoal suit. A phone rested against his ear while one of his men explained a delayed shipment. "The trucks move before noon," Vincent said quietly. No anger sharpened his voice. It never needed to. Across the room, Lila Mercer ran around the long dining table wearing one sock, a pale blue nightgown, and a silver paper crown. She held a wooden spoon like a sword. "I am the queen of breakfast," she announced. Ruth Collins, the head cook, followed with the missing sock in one hand. "Your Majesty will freeze before she reaches the throne." Lila ducked beneath the table and laughed. Near the windows, her twin sister sat inside a small support frame. Nora was quieter than Lila by nature, but that morning she had not spoken at all. Her fine brown hair fell across her forehead. One hand gripped the padded bar in front of her while she watched Lila race past. Each time Lila circled the table, Nora's fingers tightened. Vincent ended the call. Lila emerged from beneath the table and nearly collided with him. He caught her beneath the arms before she fell. "Careful," she grinned at him. "Queens do not have to be careful. Mine do." He set her down. Lila looked toward Nora. "Why does Nora never chase me?" The room changed. Ruth stopped beside the sideboard. A maid lowered her eyes. Even the clock above the fireplace seemed suddenly louder. Vincent turned toward Nora. He had answered questions from detectives, judges, bankers, and men who had entered rooms carrying weapons beneath their coats. He had learned long ago that silence made people reveal more than threats ever could. But his daughter's question left him with nothing. Nora looked down at her right leg. "My leg is bad," she said. Vincent crossed the room so quickly that Lila's paper crown fluttered from the air he displaced. He knelt beside Nora's frame. "No part of you is bad." Nora's hazel eyes lifted to his. "Then why will it not work?" The words were small. The pain inside them was not. Vincent placed one hand over hers on the metal bar. "It will." When his jaw tightened. He could buy another clinic, summon another specialist, or make an entire company change direction with one call. He could not give his daughter a date. "Soon," he said. Nora looked toward the window again. Vincent knew she did not believe him. At 9, Dr. Evelyn Carter arrived with a physical therapist and 2 cases of equipment. Dr. Carter was composed direct and unimpressed by Vincent's name. The therapy room had once been Madeline's morning salon. Now a padded mat resistance bands and foam blocks covered the elegant rug. Nora began crying before the session fully started. The therapist crouched in front of her. "We are only going to stand for 5 seconds today." Nora shook her head. "Just 5. Her breathing grew shallow. Vincent stood beside the door with his hands in his pockets. Dr. Carter had asked him not to interfere unless Nora was in danger. She believed his anxiety made the child more anxious. The therapist placed Nora's feet on the mat and began counting. 1. Nora's right knee trembled. 2. Daddy. Vincent stepped forward, but Dr. Carter stopped him with a look. Give her room. The request was reasonable. Nora did not understand that. She stared at her father, then dropped onto the bench. No more. The therapist waited, then offered her hand. Nora turned away. The session ended 20 minutes early. Afterward, Vincent stood near the windows while Dr. Carter packed the resistance bands into a case. What else do you need? He asked. More equipment? More staff? Neither. Dr. Carter closed her case. This is not a problem money can force into submission. Everything responds to pressure. Cargo does. Frightened children do not. She is getting worse. She is becoming more afraid. Vincent looked toward the empty mat. Dr. Carter softened her voice. Nora has the strength to make progress. Her body is not the only barrier. She has spent months feeling watched, corrected, counted, and disappointed. She no longer thinks of standing as movement. She thinks of it as a test she can fail. Vincent's eyes returned to her. She is 3. Yes. 3-year-olds should not know what failure feels like. Dr. Carter lifted the equipment case. And yet she does. An hour later, Grace Bennett arrived at the front gate carrying one modest suitcase and a canvas handbag. She stepped from a hired car beneath a silver sky. Her navy coat was worn at the cuffs, and her honey-brown hair was gathered into a practical knot. The guard checked her identification twice before allowing her through. A housekeeper led her past armed men and a staircase wide enough for a museum. Grace noticed the locked doors, the missing family photographs, and a child laughing somewhere above her. A second child did not laugh. Vincent interviewed her in his study. The study was dark despite the morning hour. Legal files and shipping maps covered the shelves. No photograph stood on the desk. Grace sat opposite him with her folder on her lap. Vincent read the first page. You taught preschool for 6 years. Yes. Then you resigned. My mother became ill. What kind of illness? Grace paused. The question was personal, but there was nothing casual in Vincent's manner. He gathered information the way other men gathered weapons, a neurological condition. It affects her movement and memory, and this position pays more than teaching. It pays enough to keep her in the care facility she needs. You could have hidden that. Grace met his eyes. They were darker than she expected. Not empty. Controlled. I could have, she said. It would still be true. Most applicants spoke too quickly around Vincent. They filled silence with explanations, apologies, and promises. Grace simply waited. He turned another page. You understand this is a domestic position? Yes. You will assist with meals, laundry, the children's rooms, and household routines? Yes. You are not being hired as a teacher? No. His gaze remained on her. Grace glanced toward the closed study door, where small feet had just hurried past. But children do not divide their lives into job descriptions. Vincent looked up. Grace held his stare, then added, I will respect your rules. A soft knock sounded before he could answer. The door opened. Lila entered first, now wearing both socks and dragging a wooden horse by one wheel. Nora followed in her support frame with a nanny walking close behind. Lila approached Grace immediately. Can you make bear pancakes? Grace lowered herself until they were at eye level. I can make pancakes that resemble bears. That means no. It means bears have opinions about their portraits. Lila considered this, then smiled. Nora stopped several feet away. Her eyes moved from Grace's face to the loose end of Grace's scarf. The scarf was pale yellow and soft from years of washing. Grace did not call the child closer. She did not reach out. She waited. Nora pushed the support frame forward once. The small wheels clicked against the wooden floor. Then again, she lifted one hand and touched the scarf. It is soft, Nora whispered. Grace leaned slightly closer. So are clouds, but I have never managed to catch one. Nora looked at her for a long moment. Then she smiled. The expression appeared so briefly that the nanny might have missed it. Vincent did not. Grace unpacked in a small third-floor room. She placed a photograph of her mother beside the bed. By lunch, she knew Lila refused peas. Nora disliked loud kitchen noises, and the nanny solved every difficulty by carrying Nora away from it. Grace said little. She watched. During playtime, Lila built a tower of wooden blocks in the center of the nursery. Nora sat near a shelf, unable to reach the heavier puzzle boxes stored above her shoulder. Grace moved the boxes to a lower shelf. The nanny frowned. Mr. Mercer likes everything kept where it belongs. Then this belongs where Nora can use it. The nanny looked toward the door. Grace added, "I will explain it if he asks." He did not ask. That evening, Vincent returned after 10. His coat carried the smell of rain and cold city air. After giving his security team several quiet instructions, he climbed the stairs alone. He stopped outside the twins' bedroom. Lila slept on top of her blanket with one arm wrapped around the wooden horse. Nora lay on her side facing the door. Her support frame waited near the wall. Beside it sat a pair of small leather shoes with almost no wear on the soles. Vincent remained in the doorway. Grace approached from the hall carrying folded towels. "You can go in," she said softly. He did not look at her. "They are asleep. They will still know you came." Now he turned. "You think children notice everything?" Grace shifted the towels against her hip. "Only the things adults hope they will not." Vincent should have dismissed her. No employee in the house spoke to him with that kind of directness. Instead, he entered the room. He sat beside Nora's bed and brushed the hair away from her forehead. Nora moved in her sleep. Her fingers closed around one of his. Vincent stayed for less than a minute. It was longer than he had stayed the night before. The next afternoon, Daniel Whitaker arrived without scheduling the visit. Daniel had represented the Mercer family for more than 2 decades. Lean and silver-haired, he had survived by never raising his voice. He placed 3 photographs on Vincent's desk. 2 showed the twins outside their rehabilitation clinic. The third showed a dark sedan across the street. Vincent studied the license plate. Who owns it? A company registered in Indiana. That company belongs to another company, and that one has made payments to Caleb Rourke's people. The room grew still. Caleb Rourke had spent the past year moving into Mercer territory. He was ambitious enough to be dangerous and young enough to mistake recklessness for courage. Vincent looked at the photograph of his daughters. "How long we found images from 2 clinic visits. And you are telling me now we confirm the connection this morning." Vincent pressed a button beneath his desk. His security chief entered within seconds. "Double the clinic detail," Vincent said. "Change every route. No repeating schedules." The man nodded. Daniel remained seated. "There is something else." Vincent looked at him. "Interior cameras. No, shared rooms only. This is their home. And Rourke is studying it from the outside." Vincent stood and walked toward the windows. Beyond the glass, the lake had disappeared behind afternoon fog. "I will not raise my daughters in a prison." Daniel joined him. "Then make sure no one enters who intends to turn it into one." Cameras were installed in the shared rooms and hallways. Bedrooms and bathrooms remained private. Every employee received written notice. Grace read the notice twice before signing. Vincent noticed. "You object I like knowing when I am being watched. So do I. Then we agree on something." For the first time, he saw the faintest trace of amusement in her eyes. During her first week, Grace never asked Nora to walk. She observed which foot Nora trusted, how she shifted her weight, and how loud praise made her anxious. She also noticed how quickly everyone lifted the child or fetched what she might have reached for herself. On Wednesday, Grace placed a picture book on a low bench several feet from Nora. The nanny moved to retrieve it. Grace raised one hand. "Let her decide." Nora looked at the book, then at Grace, then at the support frame in front of her. She pushed it once. The wheels moved. She pushed again. It took nearly a minute for her to cross the small distance. No one counted. No one clapped. When she reached the bench, Grace opened the book. "What took you so long?" Lila asked. Nora looked offended. "My leg." Grace turned to Lila. "Your sister crossed the room." Lila shrugged. "I can do it fast." "I know." Grace handed her another book and pointed toward the opposite shelf. "This time you walk beside her." Lila groaned. Nora smiled. Small changes followed. Grace moved heavy toys lower. She created wider paths between furniture. She placed storybooks near stable chairs and stopped adults from carrying Nora unless the child asked. She did not turn the house upside down. She moved it closer to Nora. Vincent saw little of this. He left before sunrise and returned after the girls slept. Rourke was pushing into Mercer territory, and one of Vincent's managers had disappeared with stolen money. The city demanded his attention. The house received what remained. On Friday afternoon, Grace found Nora in the kitchen, staring at a trail of white footprints. Lila had run through spilled flour before Ruth could stop her. Small marks crossed the floor from the pantry to the breakfast room. Nora stood inside her support frame and studied them. Grace began wiping flour from the tiles. "Do not," Nora said. Grace stopped. Nora pointed at the footprints. "Those are Lila's." "Yes." Nora looked down at her own shoes. "I want mine to go there." Grace set the cloth aside. She knelt beside the frame close enough for Nora to see her face without looking down. "Are you afraid?" Nora nodded. Grace did not tell her there was nothing to fear. Of falling another nod, of hurting Nora's eyes filled, of Daddy being sad. Grace glanced toward the doorway. Vincent was not there. His presence still occupied the room. She looked back at Nora. "Your father is allowed to be sad." Nora frowned as though this was a new idea. "And you are allowed to learn." Nora studied the flour marks again. "My feet do not know." Grace placed her palm on the floor beside the first footprint. "Then we will teach them." Grace's words remained in the kitchen long after Nora had looked down at the flour and pressed her lips together with quiet determination. The next morning, Grace did not bring out resistance bands. She did not ask Nora to stand straight or count to 5. Instead, she placed 3 sofa cushions across the sunroom floor and told the twins that the lake had flooded the house during the night. Lila stared at the cushions. "That is not a lake. It is a dangerous lake," Grace said, "which is why only trained explorers can cross it." Lila immediately climbed onto the first cushion. "I am trained. You are wearing your shirt backward." Lila looked down. "That is how explorers wear it." Nora watched from her support frame near the window. Sunlight reflected across Lake Michigan and filled the room with pale gold. The cushions rested only a few inches apart, but Nora looked at the gaps as if they were deep water. Grace placed Nora's stuffed fox on the final cushion. "Mr. Fox has made a terrible decision." Nora frowned. "What decision? He went sailing without a boat." Lila gasped with theatrical horror. "We have to save him." She jumped onto the second cushion. Grace caught her gently by the shoulders. "Explorers do not leave their partners behind." Lila looked toward Nora. Nora lowered her eyes. "I am slow." Grace sat on the floor between them. Slow as a speed. Lila considered this. It is a bad speed. It is useful when the floor is full of crocodiles. Lila quickly moved back to Nora's side. Nora gripped the support frame and pushed it toward the first cushion. Grace watched the angle of her right foot and the way her knee turned inward. Dr. Carter had shown her which movements were safe and which signs meant Nora needed rest. Grace had called the doctor the previous evening. She had explained that she wanted to turn the approved exercises into games. There had been a pause on the line. "You understand that imagination does not replace medical treatment," Dr. Carter had said. "I understand. And you will stop if she shows pain." "Yes." "What exactly are you planning?" Grace had looked toward the nursery where Nora slept with her stuffed fox under one arm. "I want her to forget she is being tested." Now, in the sunroom, Grace held out one hand. Nora looked at it. "You do not have to take it," Grace said. "It is only here." Nora moved one foot onto the edge of the first cushion. Her right leg trembled. Lila reached for her. Grace stopped her gently. "Let Nora ask." Nora shifted her weight. For 1 second, she stood with only the support frame beneath her hands. Then she moved onto the cushion. Lila smiled so widely that her cheeks lifted. "You are on the island." Nora looked down. The cushion had not moved. The room had not changed. But something inside her had. She pushed toward the next one. It took 11 minutes to cross the sunroom. Lila could have done it in seconds. When Nora reached the final cushion, she lifted the stuffed fox over her head. "I saved him." Grace did not clap. She did not say the words were wonderful or amazing. She simply smiled. "He looks grateful." Nora hugged the toy to her chest. The next day, colored circles appeared along the hallway floor. Grace told the twins that every circle was a safe stone in an enchanted forest. The space between them belonged to sleeping bears. Lila stepped directly between 2 circles. "You woke one," Nora whispered. Lila froze. Grace lowered her voice. "Do not move." Lila's eyes widened. "What do I do?" Nora pointed toward the nearest circle. "Step there." Lila obeyed. For the first time, Nora was not the child receiving instructions. She was leading. Grace saw the change immediately. Nora's shoulders lifted. Her voice grew firmer. When it was her turn, she moved the frame from one circle to the next, while Lila asked where they should go. At the last marker, Grace placed a paper crown on Nora's head. Lila objected. "I am the queen. You woke the bear." Lila accepted the judgment with visible resentment. By the end of the week, the children no longer asked when therapy would begin. They asked which world they would enter. The dining room became a train station. The library became a castle. The long gallery became a narrow mountain road where Lila carried the map and Nora decided the safest path. Grace never used the same game too many times. Repetition helped the body, but surprise kept fear from settling into the room. Vincent discovered the first game during a meeting. He sat at the head of a conference table on the 37th floor of Mercer Freight. Men in dark suits discussed missing inventory from one of the South Side warehouses. A manager named Elliot Pierce had lost 2 trucks and could not explain how. Vincent listened without expression. His phone rested beside a folder. A silent alert appeared. Movement in the East Gallery. He glanced down. On the live image, Lila wore a blanket around her shoulders. Nora stood several feet behind her, holding the rail with both hands. Grace had placed paper stars along the wall. Vincent lowered the phone. Elliot was still speaking. "We believe the drivers changed the route without approval." "You believe?" Vincent asked. The man swallowed. Vincent's phone lit again. He looked. Nora had moved to the next star. Her right foot dragged slightly, but she did not sit. Grace stood near her without touching her. Vincent watched for 4 seconds, then 6. Daniel, seated 2 chairs away, noticed. Vincent set the phone face down. "Find the trucks," he said. Elliot nodded quickly. The meeting continued, but Vincent's attention remained on the dark screen beside his hand. That evening, he reviewed the recording from the beginning. He watched Grace explain the game. He watched Lila run ahead and return when Grace called her back. He watched Nora take one careful sideways step along the rail, then another. At the end, Nora reached for Grace. Grace did not lift her. She crouched and allowed Nora to lean against her shoulder until her breathing slowed. "You were scared," Grace said. Nora nodded. "You still moved." Nora touched one of the paper stars. "Can we do more tomorrow?" Vincent replayed the question twice. The following afternoon he checked again, then again, the next morning. What began as a security precaution became a private ritual. He watched from offices, cars, and quiet corners of restaurants while men discussed territory and money around him. The cameras had been installed because Vincent feared someone might enter his home. Instead, they revealed how rarely he entered it himself. Grace never seemed aware of how often he watched. She moved through the house without performing for anyone. At breakfast, she let the girls stir oatmeal in ceramic bowls. Lila spilled cinnamon across the table. Ruth Collins entered the kitchen and stopped. The older woman looked at the mess as though she had discovered a body. "What happened here?" breakfast, Grace said. Ruth stared at the bowls. "Breakfast is prepared before the children enter. Not today." Lila held up a spoon coated in oats. "I made this." Ruth looked at the ceiling, perhaps asking for patience from a god who had not provided enough. Grace placed sliced strawberries on the counter. "Could you cut these into stars?" Ruth turned slowly. "I have prepared meals for governors. Did they eat fruit?" Ruth's mouth tightened. 20 minutes later, strawberry stars surrounded the oatmeal. Lila ate all of hers. Nora ate 3 and asked for another. The next morning, Grace found Ruth already cutting melon into crescent moons. Neither woman mentioned it. The playroom changed too. Grace moved heavy boxes to lower shelves. She cleared space between furniture and created small reading corners near stable chairs. Vincent noticed the difference when he returned home before 9 one evening. He stood in the doorway. The room looked less elegant than before. Paper animals covered one wall. Books leaned at imperfect angles. A line of wooden blocks crossed the carpet. It also looked inhabited. Grace sat on the floor with the twins. Lila was building a tower. Nora stood beside a low table with one hand resting on its edge. Grace noticed Vincent first. The conversation stopped. Lila jumped up. "Daddy, Nora is a mountain captain." Vincent looked at Nora. "What does a mountain captain do?" Nora answered before Grace could. "She does not fall off mountains." Grace smiled. "That is one interpretation." Vincent stepped farther into the room. Nora shifted her weight. Her right knee trembled. His body reacted before his mind did. He moved forward. Grace raised one hand. "Wait." The word was quiet. No one in Vincent's world told him to wait. He stopped anyway. Nora corrected her balance. Her knee steadied. She looked toward Grace. "I did not fall." "No," Grace said. "You found yourself." Vincent studied them both. Later that night he stood in the kitchen while Grace prepared a cup of tea. "You told me to wait." Grace did not turn around. "You looked ready to frighten her. I was ready to catch her. She did not need to be caught. She could have fallen." Grace placed the kettle down. "She will fall." Vincent's eyes hardened. "You say that too easily." "No, I say it because it is true." Grace faced him. "She will fall when she walks. Lila falls when she runs. Every child falls. Nora is not every child. That is exactly how everyone makes her feel." The room became still. Vincent stepped closer. "What are you suggesting, that she knows every adult in this house is waiting for something to go wrong? I protect my daughters." "I know." Grace's voice softened. "But protection can become a room with no doors." Vincent looked at her for a long moment. She expected anger. Instead, he asked, "Did Dr. Carter approve these exercises?" "Yes. You called her, 'I am not reckless.' I did not say you were. You thought it." Vincent almost smiled. The change was so slight Grace might have imagined it. "You are very certain of yourself," he said. "No." She poured the hot water. "I am certain of children." The next week brought Nora's first setback. On Monday she crossed the sunroom with only one hand on the backs of the chairs. On Tuesday she refused to stand. She sat on the carpet with her arms folded and watched Lila arrange colored circles along the floor. "My leg is stupid," Nora said. Grace sat beside her. Neither Ruth nor the nanny was allowed to force her upright. Lila lowered a paper map. "That is not nice. It is my leg. You still cannot be mean to it." Nora's face crumpled. Grace waited until the tears came. She did not wipe them away too quickly. After a while, she picked up a crayon and began drawing on a sheet of paper. Nora watched. "What is that, A-bird? It looks like a potato." Grace studied the drawing. "You are right." Lila leaned closer. "It is a very bad bird." Grace drew another. This one looked worse. Nora laughed despite herself. "Why do you keep doing it?" "Because my hands are learning." "They are not learning. They are slow." Nora looked toward her right foot. "Can legs learn?" Grace set the crayon down. "Everything learns when it feels safe enough to try." Nora remained seated for another minute. Then she reached for the nearest chair. Grace did not offer her hand. Nora pulled herself upright. She stood for 4 seconds. On the 5th, her knee bent and she dropped onto the carpet. No one gasped. Nora looked surprised. Then she reached for the chair again. Vincent watched the entire scene through his phone from the back seat of a car. His driver waited outside a private club in River North while 2 of Vincent's men argued quietly in the front. Vincent barely heard them. On the screen, Nora stood again. Grace said something he could not hear. Nora smiled. Vincent closed the application. "Take me home." The driver looked at him through the mirror. "Sir, the meeting begins in 20 minutes. They can begin without me." The car turned north. When Vincent entered the estate, the twins were in the sunroom. He stopped outside the doorway. Nora stood beside a chair. Grace knelt several feet away. Lila held the stuffed fox against her chest. "Do not shout," Grace whispered to her. "I know, you shouted yesterday, I forgot." Nora released the chair. Vincent's hand tightened against the doorframe. She took 1 step. Her right foot slid forward, then another. Lila's eyes widened. Nora took a 3rd. She swayed. Grace remained still. "You can stop," Grace said. Nora shook her head. She took a 4th step, then a 5th. Her balance shifted too far and she fell into Grace's arms. Lila began jumping. "You did 5. You did 5. Grace held Nora until her breathing settled. Nora looked over Grace's shoulder. She saw Vincent in the doorway. Her face lit. Daddy saw. Vincent crossed the room and knelt beside her. "Yes," he said. His voice was rougher than usual. "I saw." That evening, after the twins had gone upstairs, Vincent found Grace on the terrace overlooking the lake. A cold wind moved through the garden. Grace held a folded blanket around her shoulders and looked toward the dark water. Vincent stopped beside her. "Why did you not tell me?" Grace turned. "About what 5 steps? They belong to Nora. I am her father. Then you should have been there." The answer struck harder because she did not raise her voice. Vincent looked out at the lake. "I have responsibilities." "So does she." He turned back. Grace continued before caution could stop her. "She wakes up every morning and decides whether she is brave enough to stand. She is 3 years old, and that is her responsibility." Vincent's face became unreadable. Grace lowered her eyes. "I should not have said it that way." "Yes, you should." She looked at him again. The wind lifted a loose strand of hair across her cheek. Vincent reached toward it, then stopped before touching her. "Why do you care this much?" Grace held the blanket more tightly. "Because I used to teach children who were afraid of things adults considered small. Speaking in front of a class, entering a room without their mother, holding a pencil badly." "What happened?" "My mother became ill. You told me. I did not tell you everything." Grace explained the care facility, the bills, and the classes she attended after the household went to sleep. She spoke of special education certification and the work she hoped to return to one day. Vincent listened without interruption. Most people spoke to him because they wanted something. Grace spoke as though she had forgotten he could give her anything. When she finished, she moved towards the terrace door. Vincent caught her wrist. The contact surprised them both. His hand was warm and careful, nothing like the force Grace had expected from a man with his reputation. She looked down. Vincent released her immediately. "I am sorry." Grace studied his face. "You are not used to asking people to stay." "No." "Then use words." Vincent held her gaze. "Stay." Grace's expression softened. "For another minute for dinner." A faint smile reached her eyes. That was almost polite. She walked inside with him. Behind them, the lake moved against the shore in the darkness, steady and unseen. Dinner began quietly. Vincent sat at the head of the long table while Grace took the chair nearest the twins. Ruth served roast chicken potatoes and green beans cut into small stars. Lila pointed at one with her fork. Ruth made these. Ruth stood near the sideboard with perfect dignity. "I prepared vegetables. They are stars. They are beans." Grace lowered her eyes to hide a smile. Nora sat beside Vincent with her stuffed fox resting in her lap. She had refused to leave it upstairs after taking 5 steps toward Grace that afternoon. Vincent watched her eat. Every few minutes, Nora looked at him as if checking that he was still there. He had missed dozens of dinners since Madeline died. He had told himself the girls were too young to notice. They had food warmth staff and protection, yet Nora watched him with the cautious attention of a child expecting someone to disappear. Lila dropped her spoon. The sound cracked through the room. Vincent's hand moved instinctively toward the inside of his jacket. Grace noticed. So did Nora. The little girl froze with a piece of potato halfway to her mouth. Vincent lowered his hand. "It was only a spoon," Grace said softly. "I know," but his body had not known. For the rest of dinner, Vincent remained aware of every door, every footstep in the hallway, and every shadow crossing the windows. Grace remained aware of him. After the girls were taken upstairs, Vincent returned to his study. Daniel Whitaker was waiting beside the fireplace. A sealed envelope rested on the desk. Daniel did not sit. Vincent closed the door. "What happened?" "This was delivered to the freight office an hour ago." Vincent opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph of Grace walking through the estate garden with Nora and Lila. The picture had been taken through the iron fence. Nora held Grace's hand. Lila walked ahead with a branch over one shoulder. Across the back of the photograph, someone had written 5 words. "Even kings leave doors open." Vincent stared at the message until the room seemed to lose sound. "Rourke," he asked. "We believe so. You believe the paper carries no prints." The messenger wore a cap and kept his face from the cameras. Vincent looked at Grace in the photograph. She was smiling down at Nora. The twins had no guards visible beside them. They were inside the estate grounds protected by walls, gates, and men Vincent had paid to notice everything. Someone had still seen them. Where was security 20 yards behind? That is not protection. Daniel stepped closer. No security is perfect. Vincent's gaze lifted. Mine will be. Within an hour, the estate changed. 2 more men were stationed at the main gate. The garden doors were locked. Security patrols began crossing the terrace every 15 minutes. The girls' clinic appointments were canceled until alternate routes could be arranged. Vincent ordered new locks for the interior halls and placed an armed guard outside the playroom. When Grace entered the corridor the next morning, she stopped at the sight of him. The guard nodded politely. "Morning, Miss Bennett." Grace looked toward the playroom door. Lila sat on the carpet arranging wooden animals in a circle. Nora stood beside a table, both hands gripping its edge. Grace entered and closed the door behind her. Lila looked up. Why is that man outside? He is helping keep the house safe. Was it not safe yesterday? Grace had no answer that would comfort a child without lying to her. Vincent entered before she could speak. He wore a dark suit and carried a phone in one hand. The girls will remain inside until further notice. Grace looked at him. We plan to use the garden path. Change the plan. Nora has been practicing on different surfaces. She can practice here. The grass helps her learn how to adjust her balance. She will not be going outside. Lila hugged a wooden horse to her chest. Did the bears come? Vincent looked at her. What bears? The ones between the circles. Grace placed a hand on Lila's shoulder. No bears. Lila did not appear convinced. Vincent turned toward Grace. A word. He stepped into the hallway. Grace followed and pulled the door closed behind her. The guard stood several feet away. Grace lowered her voice. What happened? It does not concern you. Someone is standing outside the children's playroom with a gun. It concerns me. You know everything you need to know. No, I know that you came home for dinner and turned the house into a fortress before breakfast. Vincent's jaw tightened. There was a threat. To whom? My family. Grace held his gaze. Then explain it to me. I am handling it. That is not an explanation. Vincent took a step closer. This is not a discussion. The old authority returned to his voice. It was the tone that ended negotiations and made grown men lower their eyes. Grace did not move. You hired me to care for your daughters, and I am telling you how that will be done. I cannot care for them if you make them afraid of every window. They will be alive behind those windows. And terrified. Terrified is temporary. Grace looked past him at the armed guard. Not when a child grows up inside it. Vincent's expression went still. You have no understanding of the danger surrounding this family. Then help me understand. No. The answer came too quickly. Grace studied him. You are not protecting them from the danger anymore. You are protecting yourself from the feeling that you cannot control it. Vincent's voice dropped. Be careful. I am being careful. You are challenging decisions you are not qualified to make, and you are making decisions for children whose fear you refuse to see. The guard looked toward the far end of the hallway. Vincent stepped close enough that Grace could feel the heat of his anger. This conversation is finished. Grace opened the playroom door. For you, perhaps. She went inside. Vincent remained in the hallway. Through the half-closed door, he heard Lila ask whether they were prisoners. Grace answered softly, No. But sometimes adults become so frightened that they forget the difference between a lock and a wall. Vincent walked away before he heard more. For the next several days, the house settled into a new silence. Security men moved through the corridors. Doors clicked shut behind every servant. The girls were not allowed near the windows without an adult beside them. Lila began whispering whenever a guard passed. Nora stopped asking to practice in the gallery. The colored circles remained in a box. On Thursday morning, Grace found Nora sitting beside her walker. The child had not used it regularly in nearly 2 weeks. Grace knelt. Would you like to use the chairs today? Nora shook her head. The island game. Another shake. Lila sat on the floor nearby, cutting paper into uneven squares. Nora thinks the bad people will see her. Grace looked at Nora. Did someone tell you that Nora touched the metal handle of the walker? Daddy watches. Your father watches because he loves you. Bad people watch too. Grace's chest tightened. She sat beside the child. The men outside are here to keep you safe. Then why are they scared? Grace turned toward the door. A guard stood beyond the glass panel, one hand resting near his jacket. Children noticed the things adults hoped they would not. That evening, Vincent joined the girls for dinner. Lila refused to eat. Nora kept her walker beside her chair. Vincent noticed. You do not need that at the table. Nora gripped the handle. I want it. You walked 5 steps without it. Her eyes dropped to her plate. I do not want to now. Vincent looked toward Grace. She said nothing. He understood her silence as accusation. After dinner, he followed her into the kitchen. You think this is my fault? Grace placed the plates beside the sink. I think Nora is frightened. She is safe. She does not feel safe. There is a difference between feeling and reality. Not to a 3-year-old. Vincent braced both hands against the counter. What would you have me do? Tell them the truth in words they can understand? I will not describe a criminal threat to my daughters. Then tell them someone made you afraid. I am not afraid. Grace turned. Yes, you are. The words entered the space between them and stayed there. Vincent straightened. You should stop pretending you know me. I know what fear looks like. You know classrooms and children. I know what it looks like when someone tries to control every part of the room because one thing inside him feels out of control. His face hardened. Grace continued more gently. You are not weak because you are afraid for them. Fear gets people killed. No. Refusing to admit it makes you dangerous. Vincent's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Daniel. He answered without taking his eyes from Grace. What Daniel spoke for less than 20 seconds. Vincent's expression changed. I am coming. He ended the call. Stay inside tonight. Grace almost laughed, but there was no humor in her face. We are already inside. Vincent left without answering. The emergency lasted until morning. One of Vincent's warehouses had been set on fire. No one died, but 2 men were injured, and a shipment worth millions disappeared before the fire crews arrived. Caleb Rourke had stopped sending photographs. He was testing boundaries. Vincent remained downtown for 2 nights, moving between offices, warehouses, and private rooms where men spoke in low voices about retaliation. On the 3rd afternoon, Grace called him. He stared at her name on the screen before answering. What happened? Nora asked whether you are coming home. Vincent looked across the office at 6 men waiting for his decision. Tell her I will be there tonight. You told her that yesterday. His eyes closed briefly. I know. She has a session with Dr. Carter at 4. She wants you there. I cannot. Grace was silent. Vincent lowered his voice. Grace, she did not ask for another doctor. I said I cannot. Then tell her yourself. Grace handed the phone to Nora. Vincent heard the child breathe. Daddy, I am here. Come watch. He looked at the men around the table. One of them was holding a photograph of the burned warehouse. I have work. You always have work. The words were not angry. That made them worse. Vincent pressed his thumb against the edge of the desk. I will come tomorrow. Nora did not answer. Nora Grace's voice returned. She put the phone down. The call ended. Vincent stared at the screen. Then he looked at the men. Continue. At 4, Dr. Carter arrived at the estate. Nora was quiet but cooperative. She stood between 2 stable chairs in the sunroom while Grace remained several feet away. Lila sat on the floor with the stuffed fox. Dr. Carter watched Nora shift her weight. Good, she said. Now move your left foot. Nora obeyed. Her right knee trembled. Grace kept her voice calm. Find the floor. Nora breathed slowly. She moved her right foot. A security alarm exploded through the house. The sound was sharp, mechanical, and violent. Red lights flashed above the doors. Nora screamed. She turned toward the hallway. Grace moved forward. Nora, look at me. The child tried to reach her. Her right foot caught behind the left. She fell sideways. Her forehead struck the edge of a low wooden table. The room went silent inside Grace's mind. Then Nora began to cry. Blood appeared above her eyebrow. Grace lifted her immediately. Call the doctor, she shouted, forgetting Dr. Carter was already there. Dr. Carter moved beside them. Let me see. Lila stood frozen near the wall. The stuffed fox dropped from her hands. The alarm stopped. The quiet afterward felt worse. Nora clung to Grace's neck. I fell. I know. Daddy, he is coming. Grace did not know whether that was true. 10 minutes later, Vincent's car crossed the courtyard so quickly that gravel struck the stone steps. He entered the mansion with 2 men behind him. The security chief met him in the hall. False trigger. A sensor failed near the service entrance. Where are the girls' sunroom? Vincent reached the room and stopped. Nora sat in Grace's arms with a white bandage above her eyebrow. Lila pressed against Dr. Carter's side. Grace's dress was marked with a small streak of blood. Vincent saw nothing else. What happened? Dr. Carter began to answer. The alarm startled her during an exercise. Vincent looked at Grace. You let go of her. Grace's eyes widened. She was walking. She was bleeding. It is a shallow cut. She needs 2 stitches. Vincent crossed the room and took Nora from her arms. The child cried harder and reached back toward Grace. Grace! Vincent held her against his chest. You are safe. Nora twisted in his arms. Grace! Grace stepped forward. Vincent turned away from her. Do not. Dr. Carter rose. Mr. Mercer, Grace did nothing improper. I did not ask. I was supervising the session. The session is over, Vincent, Grace said. He faced her. The use of his first name sharpened the room. She kept her voice low. The alarm frightened her. She turned too quickly. You should have been holding her. She was learning to balance. She is 3. Yes, she is injured. She has a cut. The word sounded crueler than Grace intended. Vincent's face changed. A cut. Grace saw grief move through his eyes before anger covered it. He was not looking at Nora's bandage anymore. He was seeing a hospital room, a covered piano, a wife who had never returned home. Grace softened. I know you are scared. You know nothing. I know this is not Madeline. The room froze. Vincent stepped toward her. You will not speak my wife's name. Nora began crying again. Dr. Carter moved between them. This needs to stop. Vincent looked at his security chief. Take Dr. Carter to the gate. I am not leaving until Nora is examined. She will be taken to the hospital. Vincent carried Nora from the room. Lila followed him, then turned back toward Grace. Her face was pale. Did Nora do something bad? Grace crouched. No, did you? Before Grace could answer, a nanny took Lila's hand and led her away. Grace remained beside the table where Nora had fallen. A small drop of blood marked the wood. She wiped it away with her thumb. Nora received 2 stitches. The doctor confirmed there was no concussion and no serious injury. She would have a small bruise, perhaps a faint scar. Vincent listened to every word. None of it eased the pressure inside his chest. He sat beside Nora until she fell asleep. When he entered his study after midnight, Grace was waiting. Her suitcase stood near the door. Vincent looked at it. I had someone pack your things. Grace's face remained still. So you have already decided? Yes. He placed an envelope on the desk. There is 6 months of salary. Your mother's care will continue for 1 year. Grace did not touch it. You think money can make every decision clean. This is not punishment. No, it is panic. Vincent's jaw tightened. You endangered my daughter. I followed the plan Dr. Carter approved. You allowed her to walk without support. That is how walking works. She fell. Yes. The word echoed between them. Grace stepped closer to the desk. Children fall, Vincent. Not in my house. Then she will never learn to stand in it. His eyes darkened. You are finished here. Grace looked at him for a long time. There were tears in her eyes now, but they did not fall. Nora did not fall because she was learning to walk. Vincent said nothing. She fell because your alarm told her the world was ending. That alarm exists because men want to hurt my family, and this entire house now feels like those men are already inside it. Vincent's hands curled at his sides. You have no right to judge what I have done to keep them alive. I am judging what fear is doing to them. Grace pushed the envelope back across the desk. I do not want your money. It is owed to you. No, my salary is owed to me. This is what you offer when you want someone to disappear without making you feel guilty. Vincent looked away. Grace's voice broke slightly. You can guard every door. You can place a man at every window. You can watch every room from your phone. She paused. But if you teach those girls to fear every step, Caleb Rourke will not need to touch them. Vincent looked at her again. Grace lifted her suitcase. You will have done it for him. She walked toward the door. Vincent could have ordered her to stop. He could have crossed the room and taken the suitcase from her hand. He did neither. The door closed. The house became quiet before her car reached the gate. The next morning, Lila refused breakfast. Ruth had cut strawberries into stars, but the child pushed them away. "I want Grace." Vincent sat across from her. "Grace will not be returning. Why, she is no longer employed here." Lila stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means she will not live with us." Nora sat beside her with the walker pressed against her chair. She had not looked at Vincent since waking. Lila slid from her seat. "You made her leave." Vincent folded his napkin. "Sit down." "No, Lila, you make bad decisions." Ruth turned toward the stove. The nanny took one step forward, then stopped. No adult in the house spoke to Vincent that way. Lila stood with her fists at her sides. Nora fell and Grace went away. Vincent looked toward Nora. The child's fingers tightened around the walker. "Nora," he said, "Grace leaving was not your fault." Nora did not answer. Lila's eyes filled with tears. "She thinks walking makes people go away." Vincent went still. "Who told you that, Nora?" He looked at his younger daughter. "Nora, look at me." She lowered her head. "I do not want to walk." Vincent left the table. He went directly to his study and locked the door. For hours he watched old camera recordings. Grace kneeling beside Nora. Grace clearing space through the playroom. Grace waiting after a fall. Grace telling him that protection could become a room with no doors. He found the recording from the sunroom. The alarm sounded. Nora turned toward the hallway. Grace moved instantly. Her arms were already reaching for the child when Nora's foot caught. Grace had not abandoned her. She had not been careless. Nora had looked toward the doorway because she expected her father. Vincent closed his eyes. When he opened them, the screen showed Grace holding Nora against her chest while blood ran toward the child's eyebrow. Grace looked terrified, not of Vincent, of losing Nora. A knock sounded. Daniel entered. "We found the breach." Vincent closed the recording. "Who, Elliot Pierce?" The warehouse manager who had claimed the trucks disappeared without explanation. He sold road information to Rourke. The photograph came from one of his men. Vincent stood. "Bring him to the river property." Daniel did not move. Vincent looked at him. "What you can remove, Pierce. You can hurt Rourke. None of that changes why they had access. They had access because a man betrayed me. They had access because the life you built follows your daughter's home." Vincent's expression became cold. Daniel had known him since he was 19. He was one of the few men who could survive the truth. Vincent looked toward the security screen. On it, Nora sat alone in the playroom beside her walker. "What happens if I begin separating the legal companies?" Daniel understood immediately. "From the family business? Yes. People will resist. Let them. You will lose money. I have enough. You may lose authority." Vincent watched Nora touch one of the faded paper stars Grace had left on the wall. "My father built something men feared." Daniel waited. Vincent turned from the screen. "My daughters will not inherit it." Grace returned to the small apartment she kept near her mother's care facility. The rooms felt narrower than she remembered. She placed her suitcase beside the sofa and sat without removing her coat. Her phone remained silent. She told herself that was better. At the care facility the next morning, Diane Bennett did not recognize her. She looked at Grace with polite confusion. "Are you one of the nurses?" Grace sat beside the bed. "No, Mom." Diane studied her face. Grace took her hand. "It is Grace." For several seconds nothing changed. Then Diane's eyes softened. "My little teacher." Grace looked down. Not anymore. Diane touched her cheek. The little girl learned to walk. Grace tried to smile. She was learning. And now Grace's voice caught. "She does not need me." Diane watched her daughter with the uncertain clarity that sometimes broke through the illness. "Then why are you crying like you left your heart there?" That afternoon, someone knocked on Grace's apartment door. She expected a nurse or a delivery driver. Vincent stood in the hallway. He wore no tie. His coat was open and no guards were visible behind him. Nora's stuffed fox rested in one hand. Grace did not invite him inside. "How is she? She will heal." "That was not what I asked." Vincent lowered his eyes to the toy. "She will not walk." Grace closed her eyes. "She thinks you left because she fell." Pain crossed her face. Vincent continued before pride could stop him. "I was wrong." Grace looked at him. He had apologized to almost no one in his adult life. The words sounded unfamiliar in his mouth. I blamed you because I was afraid, he said. Then I called it protection because that sounded less cowardly. Grace's expression softened, but she did not move aside. What happened to the threat? I found the man who betrayed us, and he will not come near my family again. She heard the part he did not explain and chose not to ask. Vincent lifted the stuffed fox. Nora asked for this last night. Then she said she did not deserve it because brave girls do not fall. Grace covered her mouth for a second. I never told her that. I know. The hallway was silent. Vincent looked directly at her. I need you to tell her that falling did not make you leave. You made me leave. Yes. The admission carried no defense. Grace folded her arms. You need me as an employee? Vincent took a slow breath. No. The answer changed the space between them. I need you because my daughters love you. Because the house changes when you enter it. Grace looked away. And you? Vincent's hand tightened around the toy. I have been trying not to answer that. Grace's eyes returned to his. Vincent stepped closer, but he did not touch her. When you left, every room became quiet again. That is not love. No. His voice lowered. But the fact that I wanted to tear the city apart because I could not order you back might be close. Despite herself, Grace almost smiled. That is still about control. I know. Vincent, I cannot return to the same house. You will not. She studied him. What changed, I did. You changed. In 2 days. No. He looked toward the stairs. I finally stopped, pretending I had not been changing for weeks. Grace remained silent. Vincent continued. You will coordinate everything with Dr. Carter. I will attend the sessions Nora asks me to attend. The children will return to the garden once security clears it. The guards will protect the house without standing over them. And the cameras. They remain for emergencies. That is not what I asked. Vincent understood. I will stop using them to replace being present. Grace looked at him for a long moment. You do not get to order me to stay. I know. You do not get to fire me every time fear becomes anger. I know. You do not decide what happens to my life because you can afford to. Vincent nodded. Then I am asking. Grace opened the door wider. When she returned to the Mercer estate that evening, Nora did not walk toward her. She crawled across the playroom as quickly as she could and threw herself into Grace's arms. Grace fell to her knees and held her. I fell, Nora whispered. I know. Daddy made you go. Vincent stood in the doorway. Grace looked at him, then back at the child. Your father was scared. Nora pressed her face into Grace's shoulder. Scared people make mistakes, Grace said. Nora lifted her head. Is Daddy scared now? Vincent entered the room. He knelt beside them. For years, men had feared his silence because it concealed what he might do. Now his silence concealed how difficult one honest word could be. Yes, he said. Nora looked at him. Vincent placed the stuffed fox beside her. I am scared. Nora reached for the toy. Then with her other hand, she took one of Grace's fingers. Vincent remained on the floor across from them. He did not tell Nora to stand. He did not reach for her walker. He simply stayed. Vincent remained on the floor across from them. He did not tell Nora to stand. He did not reach for her walker. He simply stayed. For several minutes, no one spoke. Nora held Grace's finger with one hand and the stuffed fox with the other. Vincent sat close enough to help, but far enough that his presence did not feel like another command. Lila entered the playroom carrying 2 wooden horses. She stopped when she saw her father sitting on the carpet. Are you in trouble? Vincent looked at her. No. Then why are you on the floor? I am spending time with my daughters. Lila considered this explanation. You usually do that standing up. Grace lowered her face to hide a smile. Vincent noticed. He removed his jacket and placed it behind him. Then perhaps I have been doing it incorrectly. Lila handed him the wooden horse with the broken wheel. You can fix this. Vincent took it. Nora watched him turn the toy over in his hands. He knew how to repair contracts, damaged alliances, and the consequences of betrayal. He had no idea how to replace a wooden wheel. Grace moved beside him. You need glue. I know. You are holding it upside down. Vincent looked at the horse. Lila sighed. Grace knows everything. No, Grace said. I know where Ruth keeps the glue." For the first time since Grace returned, Nora laughed. The sound was quiet, but it loosened something in the room. Vincent looked at Grace. She was still watching Nora. He realized then that forgiveness would not arrive as one grand gesture. It would be built through morning's meals, difficult conversations, and every moment in which he chose not to let fear speak first. The following week, Dr. Carter returned to the estate. Vincent attended the session. He stood beside the sunroom windows while Nora practiced shifting her weight between two low chairs. Grace remained several feet away. Dr. Carter watched the movement of Nora's right knee. "Let the chair go when you are ready," she said. Nora looked at Vincent. He immediately lifted his hands. Grace touched his wrist. "Lower them. She is looking at me. She wants to know whether you believe she can do it." "I do." "Then show her." Vincent slowly lowered his hands. Nora released the chair. Her body swayed. Vincent's shoulders tightened. Grace felt the muscles in his wrist become rigid beneath her fingers. "Wait," she whispered. Nora shifted her left foot and recovered her balance. Vincent exhaled. Nora smiled. "I found myself." The phrase came from Grace, but the pride belonged entirely to the child. "Yes," Vincent said. "You did." By early autumn, Nora could move between pieces of furniture without her walker. She still used it when she was tired, or when unfamiliar rooms made her nervous, but it no longer followed her everywhere. Lila turned each new distance into a competition. She placed paper stars along the gallery wall and declared that Nora earned one every time she crossed without help. Grace removed half of them. Lila stared at the empty wall. Where did they go? Nora does not need a prize for every step. But she did something good. She did something ordinary. Nora looked offended. Lila looked confused. Grace crouched between them. One day, walking across a room will feel so normal that no one will stop to watch. That is what we are working toward. Nora considered the idea. Will Daddy stop watching? Grace glanced toward the doorway. Vincent stood there with a cup of coffee. He had heard the question. I will try, he said. Nora smiled. Vincent began attending 2 therapy sessions each week. At first, he treated them like meetings. He arrived exactly on time, asked Dr. Carter for progress reports, and wanted to know how many seconds Nora had stood, how many steps she had taken, and whether the right leg was stronger than it had been the week before. Grace finally closed the notebook he was using. Vincent looked at her. I was writing, you were measuring. That is how progress is tracked. Some progress. Dr. Carter remained silent, though amusement touched her face. Grace pointed toward Nora, who was sitting on the carpet with Lila. What do you see? Vincent looked at his daughter. She is resting. Look again. Nora had fallen twice during the session. Months earlier, either fall would have ended the exercise. Now she was explaining to Lila how to position a row of wooden blocks. She is not crying, Vincent said. Grace nodded. That is progress. Vincent looked down at the notebook. He set it aside. Winter arrived along the lake with hard winds and deep snow. The garden paths disappeared beneath white drifts, so Grace transformed the ballroom into an indoor town. Chairs became houses, rugs became streets, a long strip of blue cloth became a river. Lila wore a paper badge and announced that she was the mayor. Nora became the mail carrier. She walked from chair to chair, delivering folded notes. Most of the notes contained drawings that only Lila understood. Vincent returned from the city one afternoon and found a piece of paper waiting on his chair. He opened it. A crooked figure in a dark suit stood beside 3 smaller figures. Above them, Lila had written one word with Grace's help, home. Vincent folded the picture carefully and placed it inside his coat. That night, Grace found him in the kitchen after everyone else had gone to bed. He stood beside the counter with 2 cups of coffee. One of those had better be for me, she said. It is. She accepted the cup. Vincent nodded toward the books beneath her arm. How many assignments remain 3 this week? You work all day, so do you. My work does not require me to write 12 pages about language development. Your loss. Grace sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. Vincent remained beside her. You do not have to stay. I know. She looked up. Then why are you still standing there? I am deciding whether to ask permission. Grace smiled. You are improving. He sat across from her. For the next hour, Vincent reviewed contracts while Grace worked through a course module. The kitchen clock moved past midnight. They did not speak often. They did not need to. The silence between them no longer felt guarded. It felt shared. Grace's mother declined further as winter deepened. Some days, Diane remembered Grace immediately. On others, she believed her daughter was still 12 years old. Vincent never asked Grace for details in front of the household staff. He waited until they were alone. One evening, Grace entered the study carrying a folder and found a care facility invoice on Vincent's desk. Her name appeared at the top. She stopped. "What is this?" Vincent looked up from a shipping report. "An account statement. I can see that." Grace opened the invoice. A private neurological specialist had been added to Diane's care plan. The balance had been paid. Her eyes lifted slowly. "You did this. Yes, you had no right." Vincent closed the folder in front of him. The specialist was available. "That does not make this your decision. Your mother needed help. I know what she needs. I did not suggest otherwise." Grace placed the invoice on the desk. "You cannot buy your way into being kind." His expression changed. "I was not trying to." "What were you trying to do?" Vincent stood. For a second, the room seemed smaller. "Make one thing easier for you." Grace's anger faltered. Vincent continued. "You spend every hour caring for someone. Your mother, my daughters, the staff when they are too proud to admit they need anything. That does not mean you can arrange my life." "No." His voice was quiet. "It means I saw that you were tired." Grace looked down at the invoice. "You should have asked. I thought you would refuse." "I might have, I know. That is not a reason to avoid asking." Vincent stepped around the desk. "No, it is the reason I am apologizing." Grace studied him. Months earlier, he would have defended the decision until she became exhausted. Now he stood before her without authority in his voice. "I will repay you," she said. "You do not have to." "I will." Vincent almost argued. Then he nodded. "All right." Grace's expression softened. "Thank you." He looked at her. For the specialist for listening. The distance between them narrowed without either person moving. Vincent lifted one hand, then stopped. Grace noticed the hesitation. "You can touch me," she said. His fingers brushed a loose strand of hair away from her cheek. The contact was careful. Grace's breath caught. Vincent's hand remained beside her face. A knock sounded at the study door. They moved apart. Lila entered carrying a blanket. Nora had a bad dream. Grace turned immediately. Vincent reached the doorway first. They went upstairs together. Neither mentioned what had almost happened. Neither forgot it. By the time spring returned, Nora could cross the playroom without furniture if the room was quiet. Vincent had learned not to move every time she swayed. He still wanted to. Grace saw it in the way his fingers flexed at his sides. During one session, Nora took 7 steps before losing her balance. Vincent moved forward, then stopped himself. Nora dropped to one knee. She placed both hands on the floor. No one spoke. She pushed herself upright. Vincent's eyes filled with a pride too large for his controlled expression. Nora took 2 more steps. When she reached him, he lifted her into his arms. "I did not help," he said. Nora touched his face. "You waited." Vincent looked at Grace over the child's shoulder. Grace smiled. The twins' 3rd birthday arrived on a mild April afternoon. Vincent rejected the event planner's suggestion of hundreds of guests, press photographers, and a formal dinner. The ballroom was decorated with paper butterflies, pale flowers, and drawings made by the girls. Ruth prepared a table of small cakes and fruit pastries. Lila insisted that every plate include at least 1 strawberry star. Near the center of the room stood a framed photograph of Madeline Mercer. She was laughing in the picture, her dark hair moving across her face as she held 2 newborn girls against her chest. Vincent stopped when he saw it. Grace stood beside him. "I can move it," she said. "No." He looked at his wife's face. "For years I thought being happy without her meant I was leaving her behind." Grace kept her voice soft. "Grief is not a promise to remain broken." Vincent touched the edge of the frame. "I do not know what she would think of any of this. She would know her daughters are loved." His eyes moved toward Grace. "And you." Grace looked across the ballroom where Lila was attempting to climb beneath a dessert table while Nora watched. "I think she should be part of the day." Vincent nodded. She is. Guests arrived slowly. Only close relatives, trusted employees, Dr. Carter Daniel, and a few longtime friends were invited. No reporters waited beyond the gates. No business discussions were permitted in the ballroom. For one afternoon, Vincent Mercer did not want to be feared, obeyed, or consulted. He wanted to watch his daughters turn 3. Lila wore a pink dress and a silver paper crown. She introduced herself to every guest as the birthday queen. When Daniel reminded her that Nora also had a birthday, Lila considered the problem. She can be the birthday captain. Nora wore a matching dress. She moved carefully between the chairs, sometimes touching the backs for balance. Her walker waited near the wall, close enough to reach, but no longer at her side. Grace wore a simple blue dress. Her hair fell loosely over her shoulders instead of being tied back. Vincent noticed the moment she entered the ballroom. He was speaking to Daniel near the doors. Daniel followed his gaze. "You are staring. I am observing. You have security cameras for that." Vincent looked at him. Daniel lifted his glass. I said nothing. Grace moved among the children, helping with ribbons and spilled juice. She never remained in the center of the room long enough to draw attention. Vincent watched her kneel beside Nora. The child had one hand on the armchair and was looking toward her walker. Grace did not remove it. She did not tell Nora she no longer needed it. She waited. Nora looked across the room. Vincent had stepped into the hallway to speak with Daniel about a legal transfer involving several Mercer companies. The final documents would separate a large part of the legitimate business from the criminal organization his father had created. It would cost him money. It would anger men who had once considered themselves protected by his name. Vincent signed the document. Daniel placed it inside a folder. "There is no easy return from this, I know. You may lose more than you expect." Vincent looked through the ballroom doors. Lila laughed beside the cake table. Nora stood near the armchair. Grace was watching her. "I already know what that feels like." He returned to the ballroom. Nora saw him. Her eyes widened. She released the chair. Grace noticed. So did Lila. Vincent walked several steps into the room before realizing the conversations around him had begun to fade. Nora stood alone. Her walker remained near the wall. For one heartbeat, Vincent wanted to cross the room and carry her. Grace met his eyes. She gave the smallest shake of her head. Let her choose. Vincent stopped. Nora looked down at her feet. Her right leg trembled. Grace remained several feet behind her with her hands at her sides. Lila pressed both palms over her own mouth. Nora lifted her left foot. She took one step. The room became silent. Another step followed. Her right foot dragged slightly against the polished floor. Vincent lowered himself onto one knee. He did not tell her she would not fall. He had finally learned that promises like that were another form of fear. He opened his arms. "I am right here, sweetheart." Nora took a third step, then a fourth. Her shoulders shook with concentration. Vincent's vision blurred. He heard Madeline's voice in a hospital room 3 years earlier. "Take care of them." For years, he had believed care meant walls, guards, money, and control. Nora took another step. Lila could no longer remain silent. "You're doing it," she whispered. Nora smiled. Her right knee bent. A soft sound moved through the room as several guests inhaled at once. Vincent did not move. Nora corrected herself. She took another step, then another. The distance between them disappeared slowly, one careful movement at a time. When Nora reached him, her final step became a fall. Vincent caught her against his chest. Applause broke across the ballroom. Nora laughed into his shoulder. Vincent buried his face in her hair. His shoulders trembled. He had stood over injured men without blinking. He had attended his wife's funeral without allowing a tear to cross his face. Now he cried in front of everyone. Nora pulled back and touched his cheek. "I fell before." "I know." Grace came back. Vincent looked across the room. Grace stood beside Lila, tears shining in her eyes. "Yes," he said. Nora smiled. "You came back too." The words left him unable to speak. He pressed his forehead against hers. Across the ballroom, Grace lowered her eyes. The applause continued. Guests moved closer to congratulate Nora. Ruth wiped her face with the corner of her apron. Two members of Vincent's security team looked toward the windows as if the lake had suddenly become fascinating. Grace began gathering toys from the floor. It was instinct. Whenever attention moved toward her, she found something useful to do. Vincent set Nora down beside Lila and crossed the room. He took the toys from Grace's hands. "You always leave before anyone can thank you." Grace glanced at the guests. "This is Nora's moment." "It is." Vincent placed the toys on a chair. "But you taught all of us how to reach it." Grace looked at him. "You did the hardest part." "What was that you waited?" Vincent's gaze held hers. In a crowded ballroom, the silence between them felt private. Later, after the candles were extinguished and the girls had fallen asleep, Grace found Vincent alone beside Madeline's photograph. The ballroom was nearly empty. Paper butterflies moved gently in the air from an open terrace door. Grace approached him. "There is something I need to tell you." Vincent turned. The seriousness in her voice made his body tense. "What happened?" "Nothing happened." That is rarely how difficult conversations begin. Grace looked toward the sleeping house beyond the ballroom. "I was accepted into the certification program." Vincent's expression softened. "You finished the application?" "Yes." "When do classes begin in 6 weeks?" He smiled faintly. Then he saw the hesitation in her face. "What are you not telling me it is full-time?" Vincent waited. "The supervised placement is in the city. The schedule will not allow me to continue working here." The room seemed to narrow around him. "You are leaving." "I am returning to teaching." "You decided without telling me." Grace's face changed. "It is my life." The answer struck the oldest part of him, the part that wanted to close every door before loss could enter. He nearly responded from that place. Then he stopped. Grace watched the struggle move across his face. Vincent looked toward the terrace. "You are right." She had prepared herself for anger. The absence of it left her uncertain. Vincent continued, "I do not want you to go, I know. But I will not turn love into another cage." Grace became still. "Did you just call it love?" Vincent looked at her. "I have loved you badly for months." Her eyes filled. Badly, mostly in silence. Occasionally through unreasonable security arrangements. A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. "That is the least romantic confession I have ever heard. It is the only one I have." Vincent stepped closer. Grace did not move away. He spoke more quietly. "I do not want you to remain my employee. What do you want? I want you to finish your certification." Grace searched his face. "I want you to build the life you postponed." "And where are you in that life?" Vincent's control faltered. "Wherever you choose to place me." Grace looked down for a moment. "What happens if I say no, I let you leave?" The answer hurt him. She heard it. "And if I say yes?" Vincent lifted one hand and touched her cheek. "I learn how to deserve it." Grace kissed him first. The kiss began carefully. Months of restraint stood between them, along with grief, fear, anger, and every conversation they had ended too soon. Then Vincent's hand moved behind her neck, and caution gave way to something deeper. Grace held the front of his shirt. The ballroom, the estate, and the dangerous world beyond its walls disappeared. When they separated, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "You should know," Grace whispered, "that asking is much more effective than ordering. I am beginning to understand that." They sat beside the fireplace after midnight. Grace told him about the center she wanted to create one day. Not a clinic with cold halls and frightened children. A place filled with natural light gardens, toys, trained therapists, and teachers who understood that progress could begin with a story. Families who could not afford care would not be turned away. Parents would receive support instead of judgment. Children would be treated as people before they were treated as patients. Vincent listened. He did not offer her a building. He did not promise to solve everything. Instead, he asked, "What certification would you need?" Grace looked at him. "For the educational programs, what I am studying now." "The medical services would require licensed specialists. Who would lead those? Someone like Dr. Carter. How many families could the center serve? I do not know." "How would you decide who receives financial assistance?" Grace slowly smiled. "You are taking this seriously. So are you." She looked toward the dark windows. "I have thought about it for years." Vincent took her hand. "Then we begin with the questions." Before going upstairs, Vincent opened the security application on his phone. Grace watched him enter the settings. "What are you doing?" He removed his personal access to the interior cameras. Emergency monitoring would remain with the professional security team, but the live feeds would no longer follow him into meetings, cars, or sleepless nights. Grace looked at the dark screen. "Are you sure Vincent placed the phone on the table?" "No," she smiled. "That sounds honest." He looked toward the ceiling where his daughters slept. "For years I thought watching everything meant I was present." Grace squeezed his hand. And now Vincent looked at her. "Now I am coming home." Grace held Vincent's hand beside the dark security screen. For years the cameras had allowed him to witness his family without entering their lives. That night he left the phone on the table and walked upstairs beside her. Nora and Lila were asleep in the same bed. Lila had taken most of the blanket. Nora's stuffed fox rested between them, one worn ear pressed beneath her cheek. Vincent stood in the doorway. Grace waited beside him. He did not reach for his phone. He entered the room. 1 year later, Grace Bennett stood behind a curtain in a crowded auditorium, turning a graduation card over in her hands. Her name was printed inside in Lila's uneven handwriting. "Dear Grace, you did all the school. Now you can be the teacher boss. Love, Lila and Nora." Beneath the message, Nora had drawn 4 figures holding hands. One wore a dark suit, another wore a blue dress. The 2 smaller figures had paper crowns. Grace pressed the card against her chest. "You are going to wrinkle it." Vincent stood behind her in a charcoal suit, holding Nora's coat over one arm. Grace turned. "You are supposed to be sitting with the families." Lila attempted to climb onto the stage. "That sounds like Lila. She said she needed to confirm the stairs were safe." Grace smiled. "Did she?" Number Daniel caught her. Vincent moved closer. The past year had changed him in ways strangers might not notice. He still entered rooms with quiet authority. Men still lowered their voices when he passed. His suits remained dark, his expression controlled. But Grace knew the differences. He no longer checked every window during dinner. He no longer stood whenever Nora lost her balance. He asked questions before making decisions that affected her life. Most evenings he arrived home before the twins went to bed. Grace had moved from the estate into a small apartment near the university during her full-time certification program. Vincent had not argued. He had helped carry her books upstairs and left when she asked him to. They had built their relationship through deliberate choices: coffee before early classes, quiet dinners after therapy sessions, visits to Diane's care facility, weekends at the estate where Grace was no longer treated as an employee. She still kept her own key. She still chose when to use it. Vincent looked at the graduation card in her hands. "You earned this." Grace met his eyes. "We earned some of it." "No." He shook his head. "I brought coffee. You completed the work. You also read 40 pages about sensory development. I understood 6, 7. That 7th page remains uncertain." A coordinator called Grace's name from beyond the curtain. The applause rose before she stepped onto the stage. Lila's voice carried above everyone else. "That is our Grace." Nora stood on her chair beside Vincent. Grace saw him place one hand behind the child without pulling her down. Nora waved both arms. Grace crossed the stage, accepted her certificate, and looked toward the 3 people waiting for her in the audience. For the first time since she had left teaching, she did not feel as though she were returning to the life she had lost. She was entering one she had built. After the ceremony, Lila ran across the lobby and wrapped herself around Grace's waist. "You are officially smart now." "I was hoping I had been smart before." Lila considered this. "You knew where Ruth kept the glue." Nora approached more slowly. She no longer used her walker, but unfamiliar crowds made her cautious. She reached Grace and held up a small paper flower. "I made it." Grace crouched. "It is beautiful." Nora leaned close. "Daddy made one too, but it was bad." Vincent appeared behind her. "I was not informed that my work would be reviewed publicly." Grace looked at the crushed blue shape in his hand. "It has character. It is a flower, of course." His eyes narrowed slightly. Grace kissed his cheek. The tension disappeared from his face. Across the lobby, Daniel watched them with open amusement. The Bennett Mercer Children's Center began as a collection of sketches on Grace's kitchen table. Vincent had offered her one of his vacant commercial properties near Lincoln Park. Grace refused to accept it until lawyers prepared an independent nonprofit structure with a professional board. Vincent had expected resistance to the cost. He had not expected Grace to resist the gift itself. "I do not want a building that disappears if our relationship changes," she told him. "It will not. You cannot promise that. I can." "No, Vincent, you can intend it. That is different." He had gone silent. Months earlier, silence would have ended the conversation. This time he asked, "What would make you feel secure?" Grace explained. The center needed legal independence. It needed medical oversight. It needed transparent funding and a board that could reject both of them if necessary. Vincent listened. Then he gave Daniel instructions to create exactly that. Dr. Evelyn Carter agreed to lead the medical rehabilitation program after reviewing the plans. She stood in the empty building one cold morning while construction dust floated through the air. The old property had once held offices for a Mercer shipping company. Narrow rooms lined a dark central corridor. Grace walked beside her with a notebook. "We removed these walls." Dr. Carter looked around. "All of them, most." "What replaces the office's open therapy rooms?" "Natural light. A play street through the center." Vincent stood near the entrance with Daniel and two architects. Grace pointed toward the southern wall. "The windows should be lower." One architect frowned. "They meet commercial standards. They are built for adults." The man began to explain the expense. Vincent looked at him. "The windows will be lower." Grace turned. "I can answer for myself, I know. Then let me." Vincent nodded. The architect looked between them. Grace continued. "Children using wheelchairs should be able to see the garden without asking someone to lift them. That matters more than preserving a standard wall." The architect studied the plans again. "We can adjust the frames." Vincent remained silent. Later, as they walked toward the car, Grace slipped her hand into his. "You almost behaved." "I behaved perfectly. You frightened the architect." I looked at him. "You looked at him like you were choosing where to hide the body." Vincent opened the car door for her. He agreed about the windows. Grace laughed as she climbed inside. Construction lasted 8 months. Walls came down. Sunlight entered rooms that had never seen it. Wide therapy spaces replaced narrow offices. Murals covered the entrance. One hallway became a painted Chicago street where children could practice crossing intersections, entering stores, and moving through public spaces. An indoor garden room held raised planting beds. A quiet wing offered sensory spaces for children overwhelmed by noise and movement. The family support offices faced the courtyard instead of a waiting room. Grace insisted that parents should not feel hidden when they asked for financial help. Ruth volunteered to design a teaching kitchen. Lila appointed herself official cookie inspector. Nora wanted every therapy room to contain at least one stuffed fox. Dr. Carter allowed 2. The first children entered before the official opening. Grace wanted the staff to learn how the building worked before cameras and community leaders filled the entrance. Owen Price arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. He was 5 years old, with dark curls, cautious brown eyes, and a bright red fire truck held against his chest. A surgical complication had weakened his left leg. He had completed months of rehabilitation, but stopped attempting to walk after a painful fall. His father carried him into the room. Owen's mother followed with a bag of medical records. Mr. Price placed the child on a padded bench. "He can stand," he said. "He just will not." Owen looked down. Grace sat across from him. She did not ask him to move. She placed a small wooden fire station on the floor several feet away. Owen's eyes shifted toward it. Grace set the fire truck beside him. The station received an emergency call. Owen held the truck more tightly. Mr. Price sighed. "We have tried games." Grace looked at him. "Then we can try waiting. We have been waiting for 6 months." Owen's shoulders rose. Dr. Carter entered and invited his parents to speak with her near the windows. Grace remained beside the child. She rolled the fire truck 1 foot across the bench. "It has no driver." Owen reached for it. Grace pushed it slightly farther. He looked at her. "That is mine. I know. Give it back." Grace leaned toward him. "You can tell me how the driver reaches it." Owen stared at the distance between himself and the truck. He did not stand. Grace did not ask again. At the end of the appointment, she placed the truck in his hands. "You forgot the fire," he said. "The fire will still be there Thursday." Owen looked troubled by the inefficient emergency response. When he returned 2 days later, he asked for the station before removing his coat. For 3 sessions, he never stood. During the 4th, he placed both feet on the floor. His father moved forward. Grace raised one hand. "Give him a moment." Mr. Price stopped. Owen pushed against the bench. His left knee trembled. He sat again. His father exhaled sharply. Owen's face closed. Grace moved the fire station closer. The driver checked the road. Owen looked at her. He did not go. Not yet. He failed. He sat down. Owen frowned. Grace placed the truck in his lap. Those are not the same thing. Vincent watched from behind the glass wall outside the therapy room. Nora stood beside him, holding her stuffed fox. "Is he scared?" she asked. "Yes." "Will Grace make him walk?" Vincent looked through the window. Grace was listening while Owen described the fire truck's ladder. "No." Nora leaned against his leg. "She will wait." 3 weeks later, Owen stood long enough to push the truck across a low table. His parents cried. Owen did not. He made a siren sound and demanded a larger fire station. The center's work became real through hundreds of moments no audience would ever see. A girl touched sand for the first time without crying. A boy learned how to ask for a break before becoming overwhelmed. A mother slept in the parent room after admitting she had not rested for 2 days. A father who had spent months demanding progress sat quietly beside his son and celebrated one unsupported step. Grace moved through the center with a notebook under one arm, answering questions, observing classes, and kneeling whenever a child needed an adult at eye level. Vincent visited without announcing himself. He rarely entered the therapy rooms. He watched Grace work and understood that the gift she had brought into his home had never belonged only to his family. While the center took shape, Vincent's other empire began to shrink. He sold warehouse interests connected to illegal distribution routes. He removed Mercer money from private clubs used for secret negotiations. He placed the freight and construction companies under independent management. Men who had once sworn loyalty began questioning his judgment. Some left. Others threatened to expose old arrangements if he refused to protect them. Daniel brought each problem to Vincent with increasing concern. One evening, they stood inside an office overlooking the Chicago River. Boxes lined the walls. Most of Vincent's personal files had already been removed. "You lost the Calumet contract," Daniel said. "I know. 2 unions are moving toward Rourke. Let them. They will weaken the freight company. The freight company will survive." Daniel placed a folder on the desk. "This is not only money." Vincent opened it. Statements from former associates filled the first pages. The information could trigger investigations into several old Mercer operations. "They want protection," Daniel said. "They want silence. They want the man you used to be." Vincent closed the folder. Outside the window, the river reflected the lights of passing buildings. "What happens if you give it to them?" Daniel asked. "They remain loyal. And if you do not, I answer for what can be proven." Daniel studied him. "You may lose the company. I may. You may lose your freedom." Vincent's face remained still. "I know." Daniel looked toward the boxes. "Do you regret beginning this?" Vincent walked to the window. Across the city, the center's new sign had been installed that afternoon. Grace had sent him a photograph of Nora and Lila standing beneath it. "My father built something men feared," Vincent said. Daniel waited. Vincent touched the folded drawing inside his coat. Lila had made a new one for his office. 4 figures stood outside a building with bright windows. "I want my daughters to inherit something people trust." The investigations began quietly. Vincent cooperated through Daniel. He admitted responsibility for financial operations connected to companies he had controlled. He did not offer the names of men whose crimes he could not prove, but he did not lie to protect himself. Several legitimate assets were frozen. Reporters gathered outside Mercer Freight. The center's board called an emergency meeting. Grace sat beside Dr. Carter while trustees discussed whether Vincent's name should remain connected to the building. Vincent stayed at the far end of the table. One trustee looked toward him. Public association with an organized crime investigation could damage the center. Grace's hands tightened beneath the table. Vincent spoke before she could. "Remove my name." She turned. The trustee continued. "The financial structure protects the center. The building cannot be reclaimed. The programs will continue, then remove it." Grace stared at him. After the meeting, she followed him into an empty classroom. "You agreed too quickly. The center comes first. You helped build it. You built it. We both did." Vincent looked toward the hallway where children's painted handprints covered the wall. "My name should not cost them anything." Grace stepped closer. "And what does losing it cost you?" He met her eyes. "Less than losing this." The center was renamed the Bennett Children's Center before the official opening. Grace objected to having her name stand alone, but the board voted unanimously. Vincent did not attend the meeting. When she confronted him, he said, "You asked for an independent board." "I did. They decided. You influenced them." "I did not." Grace studied him. For once she believed he had allowed a decision to happen without controlling it. Diane Bennett arrived at the opening ceremony in a wheelchair. Her illness had progressed. Her hair was thinner and her hands trembled in her lap. Grace knelt beside her in the entrance hall. "Do you know where we are?" Diane looked at the murals. "A school. Partly. For your children." Grace smiled. "For many children." Diane touched her daughter's face. "You went back." Grace lowered her eyes. "Yes." Diane looked across the hall. Nora approached in a white dress, walking carefully through the crowd. She held out her stuffed fox. "This is Felix." Diane accepted the toy. "He looks brave. He used to be scared." "So did I," Diane said. Nora took the handle of the wheelchair. "I can show you the garden." A nurse moved forward to help. Nora shook her head. "I know how." She walked slowly beside Diane as the wheelchair moved through the hall. Grace watched them disappear beneath the painted archway. Vincent came to stand beside her. "Is she having a good day?" "She knew me." Grace wiped beneath one eye. "She knew I went back to teaching." Vincent placed his hand against the center of her back. Grace leaned into him. The opening ceremony began at noon. Therapists, educators, donors, families, and community leaders filled the main hall. Reporters stood near the rear, though Grace had refused to turn the event into a public defense of Vincent. Children's artwork hung behind the stage. No marble statues stood in the entrance. No portraits of donors occupied the walls. Grace spoke first. She thanked the staff, the families, Dr. Carter, and the children who had entered the unfinished building while paint still dried in the hallways. Then she invited Vincent forward. A quiet tension moved through the audience. Vincent approached the microphone. He wore a dark suit without a tie. For a moment he looked toward Nora and Lila in the front row. Then he looked at Grace. "When my daughter began rehabilitation, I believed enough money could solve any problem." His voice carried through the hall. "I hired specialists. I purchased equipment. I demanded progress." Dr. Carter watched from beside the stage. My daughter had medical support. What she did not have was a reason to trust the process. Vincent looked towards the therapy rooms. Doctors gave Nora a safe path. Grace taught her not to be afraid of taking it. He turned toward Dr. Carter. "This center exists because children need both." The applause began softly. Vincent continued, "It also exists because Grace Bennett refused to let my fear become my daughter's future." Grace's eyes filled. He stepped away from the microphone before the speech could become a performance. The applause rose. Grace joined him on stage. He offered his hand. She took it. Lila ran toward them before the applause ended. Grace Owen put the fire truck in the fountain. Grace closed her eyes. Again Nora followed her sister onto the stage. Lila pointed toward the garden. "You have to come." Nora looked up at Grace. "Mama Grace can fix it." The words seemed to stop the room. Grace stared down at her. Vincent became completely still. Nora's face changed. Was that wrong? Grace knelt. "No." Her voice trembled. It was not wrong. Lila looked between them. "Can I say it too?" Grace touched her cheek. "You can call me whatever feels right." Lila considered this with great seriousness. Then she wrapped both arms around Grace's neck. "Mama Grace Owen is flooding the garden." Laughter moved through the hall. Grace held both girls against her. She looked over their shoulders at Vincent. Tears stood in his eyes, but he did not interfere. The choice belonged to the children. Later, Nora found Madeline's photograph in Grace's office. Grace had placed it on a shelf beside the twins' drawings. "Is Mommy sad when I call you Mama Grace sat beside her?" "No." "How do you know I do not know everything about heaven?" Nora touched the photograph. But I know love does not become smaller when we share it. Nora looked at Grace. Can I love Mommy and you? Grace held out her arms. You never have to stop loving someone to love another person. Nora climbed into her lap. Outside the office, Vincent stood unseen. He placed one hand against the wall and closed his eyes. The guests departed near sunset. Staff members remained in the building, cleaning spilled juice and searching for Owen's fire truck, which had finally been recovered from the fountain. Vincent found Grace in the therapy garden. Children's painted handprints covered one wall. A young maple tree stood near the center of the path. Grace touched one of the leaves. Madeline's tree is growing. Vincent stopped beside her. Nora chose it. She said maples are brave in winter. She also said the roots would frighten bad people. Grace smiled. Vincent reached inside his coat. She saw the ring before he spoke. For the first time that day, she appeared afraid. Vincent did not kneel, not yet. This is not payment, he said. Grace looked at him. It is not a debt. It is not gratitude. It is not an order. You practiced that. 3 weeks. Only 3. Daniel rejected the first version. What did it say? It was concise. Was it romantic? Grace laughed softly. Vincent took her hand. Does this place feel like the future you imagined? She looked toward the bright windows. It feels larger. Vincent nodded. So does mine. Then he lowered himself onto one knee. Grace covered her mouth. I cannot promise an easy life, he said. I cannot erase what I have done. I cannot guarantee that every consequence is behind us. She listened without moving. But I can tell you the truth. I can ask instead of command. I can remain when fear tells me to leave. He opened the ring box. Grace Bennett, will you marry me? She knelt in front of him. Vincent's expression changed. You are supposed to remain standing. I do not like looking down at you. That is the purpose of the position. Grace touched his face. Yes. He stared at her. Yes, yes, Vincent. He kissed her before she could laugh again. A cheer erupted from the center's terrace. They separated. Lila, Nora, Ruth, Daniel, Dr. Carter, and several staff members stood behind the glass doors. Grace looked at Vincent. You told them. I told no one. Daniel raised one hand. The ring box was visible through your coat. Vincent looked toward him. Daniel stepped behind Ruth. Grace laughed and kissed Vincent again. Summer settled over the Mercer estate several months later. The interior cameras remained in their corners, but their lights stayed dark unless the professional security system detected an emergency. The garden doors stood open. Lila and Nora raced across the lawn beneath the maple trees. Nora's stride remained slightly uneven when she became tired. Dr. Carter had explained that some weakness might always remain. No one treated it as failure. Nora chased her sister around a fountain. Her right foot caught in the grass. She fell forward onto both hands. Vincent rose from his chair on the terrace. Grace touched his arm. They waited. Nora looked at the dirt on her palms. Lila ran back. Are you hurt? Nora shook her head. She pushed herself upright. Then she began running again. Vincent slowly sat down. Grace rested her head against his shoulder. You almost moved. I did move. You stopped. He watched Nora disappear behind the hedge with Lila. I am improving. Slowly. Slow as a speed. Vincent looked at her. Grace smiled. As evening settled over the lake, the girls ran toward the house. Lila argued that birthday queens deserved dessert on ordinary days. Nora carried Felix beneath one arm. Grace walked beside Vincent. At the entrance, Nora reached back and took Grace's hand. Lila took Vincent's. The 4 of them entered together. Vincent closed the door behind them. For the first time in years, he did not look toward the nearest camera. He followed the sound of his family into the light.